Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study human skeleton health, disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, works in ancient DNA, looking mainly at the genetics of extinct cats.
And today we are reviewing a movie called Evolution's Child from 1999. This is a made-for-TV movie, which was even more ridiculous than I was expecting. I don't know what you guys thought about it.
I thought it was better than it sort of... I mean, we've seen so many films like this, but this one actually didn't go too bad. I mean, it was not obviously cheap.
Except for they conflated like inheritance with it's not even cloning, but like what's the word when you come back to life?
Memory of
reincarnation.
Reincarnation.
Reincarnation, yeah.
Yeah. It's obviously it's not a perfect film, but it's definitely it's definitely better than maybe I had expected, since it was one of Josh's choices.
That's true. But did the kid die at the end? I'm not even sure. Did they?
Yeah.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They were brown bread.
Well, the doctor, when he came out, he didn't even say anything.
Right off the top of the movie. Yeah. This is a movie where the child, who is one of the main characters of the movie, dies at the end. They killed the child at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
He is pretty annoying, though.
Okay, so who wants to summarize this movie that we've been hinting at here?
I can do it.
Okay.
So, we meet, scientists in the north who discovered a frozen Iceman, a Bronze Age frozen man in the Alps, which is very similar to, if not exactly like Ötzi, right? So they essentially slipped in Ötzi. And, then there's a scientist that she wants to study every single aspect of him. So she finds this fertility doctor who specializes in helping couples who can't conceive get pregnant. And so she asks him if she can get sperm out of the Iceman, which I don't know why you need a specialist to do that, like for a dead guy, right?
Oh, she explains it.
Does she? You can just open it. Anyways. So she asked him to take the sperm with the idea that they'd like to study it or something. So he takes the sperm and then brings it back to his clinic and gives it to his overworked assistant and just says, like, catalog this under my name. And then at this point, he's also trying to help an old friend of his and his wife have a baby that they've been trying, and they keep having miscarriages. And he gets her pregnant once with his inseminations, but then she loses the baby. And then so they try again, and then they find out she's pregnant. The pregnancy's gone well, everything. And then the doctor comes up, and his overworked assistant is like, I think I fucked up. I put in the wrong sperm into the wrong person. That mysterious test tube of sperm that you gave me that I was supposed to label, I think I put it into your friend's wife. And then the doctor was like, no, you didn't. Because the doctor at that point realizes that, yes, that is exactly what happens. But then he goes through this whole calculation of having to admit the ethical issues of that. And then also having to say that to his friend and his wife, who's really happy about a pregnancy, who'd been trying so hard. And so he just kind of goes and measured out all of the repercussions and then decides that he just said, no, I mislabeled it. It's my fault. You didn't do anything wrong. That's the right sperm. And so then he just keeps this secret to himself, but then gets really close to the boy because he's also kind of secretly studying him and making notes on his computer in a hidden file about how the boy is growing up and what he's like, because he's the offspring of this contemporary modern human and a Bronze Age modern human. And what they start to notice is that the little boy has, what did they call it? Inherited memories or something. So he has special powers. He can call fish, and he just seems to know to do that. Even when he's 1 year old, he calls fish to him. He can talk to animals with telepathy. He has memories of and dreams about being, on the Alps and living this other life in this other time. And he has a feeling himself that he doesn't belong, and he knows he doesn't belong there and it's not right. But he's a very smart, very kind little boy. He also then, weirdly, so the doctor, he gets sick or something and they give him a blood test. And then the doctor's friend says, well, this can't be the blood of an infant because, or a child, because it has antibodies for rabies and typhoid and yellow fever and anthrax and all of these diseases that humans haven't had to deal with in a long, long time. So there's no way, like, you've given me the blood of an adult that's had these vaccinations. So then the doctor's like, okay, that's interesting. So he's obviously got some built-in immunity to these diseases. But then him and his family moved to England, and the little boy gets like a common flu and almost dies from it. So like, we're catching on to the idea here that he has all these antibodies for these, diseases that we no longer have. But the modern flu, he doesn't have any resistance to, so it almost killed him. And then the lady who wanted to get the sperm in the first place, the scientist, comes back and she asks the doctor if he would fertilize the sperm. She doesn't want him to make an embryo. She just wants it to be able to multiply a few times, just so they can then take that genetic material and see what it looks like and see if there's any information in his genetic material that can be used to cure diseases and stuff. But he's worried about that because he thinks it's going to be sold to pharmaceutical companies, and he doesn't want anybody thinking about that or looking around or poking about, and because he doesn't want anybody to find out about the boy. But then his office gets broken into for reasons that aren't entirely clear, and they only steal his computer for a reason that's not entirely clear. Might be that they're just after records for celebrities so that they can blackmail them. I don't know. It doesn't make sense at a fertility clinic, though. And but the guy who stole the laptop finds his secret notes, like his report with all these field notes about the little boy growing up. And so he blackmails him, says, if you don't pay me $250,000, I'm going to leak this out. And so the doctor pays him $250,000, but the guy leaks it anyways. But he leaks it to the National Enquirer, which is the best place that you would want it to get leaked to, right? Because if a story is not going to be believed, it's going to have to it comes out in the National Enquirer first, right? Anyways, but everybody believes it right away. There's yeah, there's no resistance to this idea. It gets leaked out in the National Enquirer, and then everybody believes it. There's no question. It's now, he's the boy. This Adam is now the boy that's from Bronze Age man. And so the doctor, once he realizes that it's been leaked, he makes this choice that he says, the only thing I can do is something really big and drastic and fast. So he essentially kidnaps Adam and takes him to a remote village somewhere where people don't care or don't know about the story, under the intentions that he's protecting Adam from the downfall of the media, and then hopefully also becoming a pharmaceutical lab rat and all these things. And he's trying to tell the parents that, Adam's not hurt, he's not unsafe, he's doing it for his best interest, and he'll bring him back in 6 months once everybody's forgotten about the story and moved on to something else. But then they go there and it's all fine. Adam is perfectly fine with this because he feels like he didn't belong there anyways. He feels like he belongs in this smaller community. And then they get arrested because the guy, another doctor that was helping them hide, gets caught. And so then they get arrested, they get found out, they bring Adam home. Then Adam falls sick again with another, the common flu again. They can't do anything for him. And he dies, and the doctor goes to jail for a little bit, but then gets out and then is living on his savings and is perfectly fine and taking time for self-reflection. Did I miss anything? There's no dinosaurs, right? Usually I would miss the...
There's, a couple of things about how Adam's mother is pregnant again just before he dies, and Adam knows this because he uses his spooky powers. Right. And then there's the whole thing about
he can feel 2 heartbeats in her.
Yeah. And there's the whole thing about him wanting to see where Ötzi was unearthed, and puts Adam's little toy totem pole that he got from the museum there. But yeah. Right. I mean, I had it on 1.25 times speed at first, but then I undid that because it wasn't as bad as I
these movies
thought.
They move such a slow pace anyways that when I have it at 1.25, half the time I forget and I don't notice.
What annoyed me is that they didn't, all the people were just really they were clearly sort of TV actors, so the acting wasn't great. But they also had stupidly similar names. So like the main doctor is what Mydell, and then the college friends that they're helping out are Cardells. And like, choose another syllable to have in your name, so that make them slightly more differentiable.
Yep, especially with a badly recorded YouTube video that you can't really hear everything very well. Or
a funny thing about this movie I found is that on IMDb and Wikipedia, some of the information just seems to be totally wrong. Like on Wikipedia, it says that this ice mummy was found in Colorado, which it says very clearly on the screen. It's in the Italian Alps, so I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
And also the archaeology doctor, anthropologist, whatever she is, on IMDb it says her name is Beth Leider, the character's name, but in the movie they say her name is Beth Connors, and I just don't know where these weird little obvious errors come from. It's just weird trying to research this movie because it's a made-for-TV movie. It's not a big movie or anything, so it's just strange that there's so many little errors to me.
Maybe like an initial draft that got changed.
Yeah,
maybe.
Could be. I think for a TV movie, though, it's better than some of the big releases that we've reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing super, well, apart from the entire plot, there's nothing too ridiculous in there. I mean, it's a theme that we've come across again and again, but it's done, fairly subtly and fairly well, I thought.
It's a well-made TV movie.
Yeah.
With, TV acting. But, like you said, apart from the plot, so let's get into that. Any inaccuracies in the details of this movie?
Well, now then. If I could go, so it's really weird that they've decided. I mean, they're clearly cashing in on the sort of Ötzi thing, because it's really weird that they've decided to go all kind of mystical about a Bronze Age guy. That's only like 3,000 years ago. That's somebody that was exactly the same as us, would not have had mystical powers and been able to speak to fish, and have some kind of weird sperm memory. I mean, that's just like weird. It's like being able to remember what your dad was doing as a kid. I mean, nobody wants that.
It's essentially saying that, say there was time travel and a dude from nowadays went back in time, right? Like Josh, you went back in time, got pregnant, got a Bronze Age woman pregnant. My brain is boiling. And then like you left and they had the baby, and then this baby has like dreams about shopping malls and cell phones, and right, like that's essentially what they are saying would happen.
Yeah, totally. And the Bronze Age, climatically, it's the same. There's like this mini monologue that the doctor goes on about how it's before sickle cell, before Alzheimer's, before pollution. It's not before any of those things. Like, Alzheimer's has been around for a long, long time. Pollution has been around since people, were making fires. So pollution goes back a long way. And even like the forms of pollution you get today, we can see there's been papers published where they found like, lead in the atmosphere going back right to the beginning of the kind of metallurgy, because these people are kind of smelting huge amounts of ore, like releasing all sorts of noxious things into the atmosphere, and then it's coming back down and being preserved. So yeah, that annoyed me. And then the other thing they got totally wrong was, it sort of does make sense that somebody, because some immunity is genetically carried, like we do have.
But you don't inherit antibodies.
Yeah.
No, but you do inherit particular flavors of antibodies that can be made. I'm thinking way back to...
Yeah, you inherit the ability... Sorry, the way that I understand it is you inherit the, like, building blocks to be able to have the antibodies, but you don't inherit the antibodies, right?
No.
Is that right?
But my remembering of the immunology I did like 20 years ago was that, there is, the kind of antibodies themselves are made from a whole bunch of different subunits, which are genetically coded, and there's various variants. I mean, this is, I think, partly what tissue typing has to do with, is that because of the way the antigens respond to, or the antibodies respond to different antigens, some people are more compatible than others because they share parts of the antibodies that they can produce. So I probably should have done some more reading into this before opening my mouth, but there's a little bit of sort of sense there. It's possible that in the 3,000 years, because if anything's going to evolve at a faster rate, it's going to be immune genes. That's the thing that is going to be under kind of strong selection pressure over the past 3,000 years, especially all the kind of novel diseases we've been exposed to. So there's a hint of a kind of real idea there. But when they're talking about it, they get it completely wrong. So they talk about how they get herd immunity totally wrong, which in a kind of post-COVID age, we feel kind of is very stupid. So I think their kind of understanding of herd immunity, I didn't quite understand. They kind of made it sound like something that everyone had, whereas, actual herd immunity as it's used when discussed by immunologists or epidemiologists or whatever is just about having enough people protected by vaccines or by natural immunity that the disease vector can't find a new host. So it's just about reducing the chances for a disease vector to spread by not giving it opportunities to jump from individual to individual. So yeah, that was annoying too. And even in 1999, people knew what herd immunity was, so that's just sloppy. But those were the two ones that I underlined that annoyed me the most.
But even if this boy had a direct inheritance of particular antibodies for these diseases, okay, that idea would be that we would have that then too, unless there was some reason why it stopped somewhere between the Bronze Age and here, stopped being passed
absolutely.
on.
Yeah, that's
so
a
then
good
we
point.
wouldn't have had to have those epidemics and vaccinations in them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I have a couple more points on this topic. This is a pretty good one, but they do say that he specifically, when he takes that secret blood test, and the doctor says that it looks like regular human blood, except that it has the antibodies for all these diseases. So he does specifically say it's not that he has a genetic predisposition to produce these antibodies. It is that he actually has these antibodies in his blood, and the antibodies he has are for bubonic plague, yellow fever, rabies, anthrax, and smallpox. And what that means is that, if my understanding of antibodies is correct, if he has the antibodies, that means he has been exposed to all those diseases.
Or his mother was, because you can get the antibodies from indirect inheritance through the mum, the placenta.
Except, of course, that it's his father that was exposed to all these diseases.
Yeah, and the fact that there is no cure for rabies. Like if you were exposed to rabies before before the treatments were available, then you died, and that's it. And even now, if you don't get the
only way this makes any sense is if he had rabies, and that's why he was walking up to the mountain to die.
Yeah.
And then, Kim, you pointed out the other thing is the movie totally forgets that he's not a clone of this Bronze Age man. He is an offspring, which means his mother has all of the genes for whatever antibodies we have in the present. So there's no reason he should be totally lacking all of the modern antibodies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because he would get it through her placenta and through the indirect. And then also, in the same way that a lot of kids, you may not have as good of immunity, you may not have gotten it from your parents, but growing up, I mean, he was 9 years old at that point. So he would have been in and around flu germs and other germs from other kids. And he would have been living in the modern world and would have eventually also developed some kind of resistance to it, probably, or died a lot younger from it, I think. Because he wasn't exposed to a flu until he was 9.
As long as he had some of his mother's genes and he was exposed to stuff that was in the kind of general population, he should have been all right.
Yeah. But I think this is their way of also pushing the idea that his life would be miserable if everybody found out about it, because they'd want to make him like a drug monkey, right? The pharmaceutical companies would want to mine his DNA.
Which is ridiculous, because, I mean, all they did was
movie bingo.
Yeah.
They just need to take a a blood sample from him. That's it.
Well, and usually, like, if it was me and my kid, and I found, like, yes, I'd be upset about it. It's not my husband's sperm; it's a sperm of a 3,000-year-old man frozen in the Alps. Like, I'd be upset, but it's still your son. And then I would make it so that, take a blood sample and you can study his blood and make these things, but it has to be non-profit. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure that you could make a lawyer could draft up some kind of something, right? So
yeah.
Okay, why don't we talk about the DNA a little bit? Ross, why is sperm the best source of ancient DNA?
Isn't, I would say.
It's pretty fragile, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's only half the genome in each sperm, so you're only getting kind of half the story.
So the dialogue here is that she tells him that she wants him to extract sperm from this Iceman for a DNA study, and he says, you can get that from a hair follicle, and she's like, not a complete chain. And like, that's exactly the opposite of the truth. You're only getting half of the DNA from the sperm, right?
I mean, I could see, I sort of saw what she was trying to say there. Like, she was maybe sort of suggesting that there was some kind of preservation that stopped it from fragmenting in sperm. I mean, that's ridiculous. That wouldn't happen. But she's right that it does matter whether it's in one continuous chain or not.
Another question for you, Ross, to put the listeners' minds at ease. In all the genetics labs where you've ever worked, what kind of safeguards are in place to make sure you keep the ancient DNA from cross-contaminating the in vitro fertilization lab?
That is a really good question. We tend not to mix our ancient DNA with fertility clinics. For starts. But one of the sort of big things with all kind of ancient DNA work is you have to keep it totally separate from modern DNA, because modern DNA is high quality and easily amplified, and ancient DNA isn't. So unless you keep the two completely separate, you will get contaminants in your work, and you'll end up amplifying just modern DNA, which is not what you need. And this is what was a big problem in the early days of ancient DNA. That's why, you got these sort of papers about DNA from dinosaurs and from amber and stuff that inspired Michael Crichton in Jurassic Park. But it was all just contamination from the air, from the lab, from next door's lab, from the lunch you had, from hair follicles that were falling out, and dust, all these kind of things, because they weren't controlling very well for contamination. So yeah. Plus, even if they could, and I'm pretty sure I remember reading an article about Ötzi that, like, almost immediately after he was discovered, women were volunteering themselves to be fertilized with his sperm. I mean, but it would just be impossible because, the sperm have to be living, they have to be viable, they have to have unbroken chromosomes and DNA strands inside them, and that's not going to happen if it's been sitting in the Alps for 3,000 years. So hopefully that puts the listeners' minds at rest.
Hypothetically, it would just be a normal modern human child, right? Like,
totally.
Has there been that much? There hasn't been that much. Yeah, there'd be. It's not like William, right? Where there was. I mean, it's a different species.
I'm not even sure. I mean, the most work that I know of has been done on things like lactase persistence. So the ability of some groups, like some sub-Saharan African, some Western European groups, to metabolize lactose as adults, which is usually an ability that's lost after weaning. And that's been strongly selected for in some populations with the rise of agriculture and herding of cattle, where you can, or other kind of milk-bearing mammals. So I'm not entirely sure when that became fixed. I'd have to go back and read some of the papers, but in terms of differences between the Bronze Age and now, there may have been a slightly higher chance that he would have a dodgy tummy if he ever drank milk or any kind of dairy products. But that's about it, I think, in terms of kind of phenotype.
Yeah, that's one of the big flaws with the movie is why choose a 3,000-year-old man? He's pretty much genetically the same as people living today. Like, even Ötzi himself is older than that, right? Ötzi is 5,000 or 7,000? How old is Ötzi?
Something like that. He's Copper Age, I think, is what I remember reading.
Yeah.
So that's before Bronze Age.
Right now.
So, like, yeah, it's just strange coming from like a paleoanthropology perspective. Like 3,000 years old is such an ancient man. Like 3,000 years old is basically the modern day to me.
Yeah. So it's 3,000 BCE. So
yeah,
5,000 years.
And even Ötzi is, he's not biologically different from people living today. He's just interesting because of the preservation and the culture that he's carrying. So we get to see, stuff that doesn't normally preserve, like his clothes and
tattoos,
stuff like that. But
tattoos,
yeah.
They brought up in the movie too that they had his pouch, right? Which is Ötzi did have a pouch with medicinal type plants and stuff.
Magic plants.
Yeah, I think that also tied into the boy being a bit magic, was that he was a healer or whatever, right?
Yeah, the ice mummy was a shaman, they said. So he carries a pouch of medicinal plants and also is telepathic for some reason.
It's weird that
and so
somehow being a shaman is genetically linked. Like you have fixed at birth. Oh yeah, you're telepathic, so you have to become a shaman.
And then apparently we lost that since there are no telepathic shamans in modern human society.
Imagine how easy it would be to forage for food if you could telepathically tell the fish to jump into your net. Why bother inventing agriculture if you could do that?
But also the kid doesn't seem to want to harm animals in any way. He breaks up the dog fight. He can talk to the animals, and
he can walk with the animals.
Seems to think that all animals should be peaceful.
A regular Dr. Dolittle.
So it doesn't seem like he's using his powers to catch animals to eat. Seems like he would be morally opposed to that.
But they also had him like more mature than his age and more wise than his age, right? Like they were trying to show that he had this knowledge beyond his years and that he didn't belong there and everything. And again, that's like the idea of reincarnation. That's not even cloning, right? Because cloning, again, you're starting from scratch. You might have this exact same genetics, but you'd have the modern, like the different life experiences. But it was this idea that they just took this man's spirit somehow and reincarnated him.
It's also a kind of
instead
weird
of just
and simplistic kind of the sort of noble savage nonsense about how in the past everyone was peaceful and wise and didn't have exactly the same kind of foibles that modern people have.
And also that all non-Western civilizations are the same, right? Because he's from Bronze Age Italian Alps, and the solution that this doctor has at the end is to take him to go see totem poles and then find a First Nations tribe that's somehow living off grid. And he's like, if I take you to live with these, First Nations people in the Pacific Northwest, like you'll just fit in perfectly because they're exactly like you. Like it's again, I guess it's the noble savage. I was trying to figure out if there's a name for that trope. It's not quite exactly the same thing, but more or less noble savage, right?
And just a very ignorant view of kind of what culture is, and you wouldn't dream of like, I don't know, trying to think of an analogy. You couldn't like take a kid out of central Glasgow and then drop him in central Berlin and expect him to be fine. I mean, they're both Western Europeans, but that's just not how the world works.
No. And he even seemed to recognize totem poles and knew what the totem, had this idea of what totem poles were. And they were like, wow, he even knows.
Which does a disservice to,
it's an innate thing for him to have.
Yeah, it's totally kind of whitewashing the complex ideas that go behind the mythologies and the legends and the symbolism of them.
The uniqueness of each
of the
culture.
Pacific Northwest. Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Kim, did you notice all the landmarks that show off where this movie was filmed?
There was places that looked really familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But I would say
the totem
in my home.
I've never been to Vancouver, but it was clearly filmed in Vancouver because the museum with the totem poles was the Museum of Anthropology at the University of British Columbia. And there's a scene with a very famous staircase in Vancouver called the Robson Square Steps.
Yes,
Which, again, I've never been to Vancouver, but I recognize both of these landmarks probably from like X-Files, which was also filmed in Vancouver, right? The general feel of the whole show does feel a lot like X-Files in some ways, although not as dark, I guess, in general.
And there's definitely buildings that were probably from SFU or UBC campus too.
Mm-hmm.
It totally could have been an X-Files episode. If they just had Mulder and Scully appear, that would have been cool.
And the boy, like when he died, he just like absorbed or like turned into stardust or something.
Yeah. Or was abducted by aliens instead of dying.
Yeah. His family came back for him.
Going back to the archaeology, when the doctor has a meeting with the paleoanthropologist about a year or two after he harvests the sperm for her, and she's like, let me tell you about all our findings. And she talks about the archaeological findings. She talks about these leather pouches that have willow, birch, dandelion, nightshade, raw opium. And based on that interpretation, she says he's a doctor. But she was so excited to harvest the sperm to get DNA. And then like 2 years later, she's like, let me tell you about our results. Here's the archaeological results. Like, what about the DNA results? Like, I thought that was what you were studying, right? Are you an like a paleogeneticist, or are you an archaeologist who's interested in the artifacts, right? She didn't actually have any. She never said any results about what the DNA said, but everybody seems really interested in the DNA.
She also never took the sperm. She asked him to collect the sperm, and he did. Then he took the sperm back with him and he put it in his lab. So she never had it.
No, what happened was, this is how I know that her name was Beth Connors and not Beth Leiter, because on that busy day at his lab, his assistant or secretary, when he showed up, she's like, this box just arrived for you, and he opens it up, and she's like, thanks for the sample, here's a souvenir. So she like gave him, she like used up the sperm that she needed, and she's like, here's the leftover sperm for a souvenir. And that's another question for you, Ross. Do you take DNA samples as souvenirs just for fun?
Certainly. I think there would be a lot of questions asked if we were taking free donations of sperm. That's not something I would encourage or suggest. Though on a complete tangent, I used to, as a student, I worked in a biochemistry department in the hospital where we'd get like blood samples and stuff. And one day, a very lost guy came to the window of our office and plonked down a sperm sample on our desk, and we very quickly told him he was in the wrong place, and he had to go back along the corridor to find the people that would take his sample off him. But yeah, no, certainly donation is frowned upon, and it's just not how kind of research works. You have to have a question. You have to find things that are relevant to your question. You can't just say, "Oh, this looks interesting. Here, have some."
Yeah, it's very like the antiquarian idea of like keeping a piece of it for and taking the finger of a mummy or something and keeping it.
That's a really good point. Oftentimes, like if we're going to do destructive sampling of a specimen, then written into the contract that allows us to take a small bit of bone or a bit of tissue or whatever is that anything that's not used has to be returned, because that's still part of the museum's accession. It's still part of the wherever the museum is, or it's part of that people's kind of cultural patronage, or however you want to describe it. It's not something that we can just hold on to and put in a drawer somewhere.
Well, and it's a finite resource too, right?
Yeah.
So if someone wants to do another destructive sampling, like methods change in the future, then people can go and maybe use the part that you didn't use instead of taking another new destructive sample.
Yeah.
And this guy's not producing more sperm, right? I mean, we have watched movies where that would happen, but not in this movie.
There's a funny line that I have written down here where I think it was with the woman's first miscarriage, because she gets pregnant at first and then miscarries, and then she accidentally gets impregnated, which feels like extra complication for this movie plot. You only need to have her get pregnant once. You don't need to make her have a miscarriage and then get pregnant again.
Yeah.
But They say that the fetus was deformed, and they're sort of speculating about why. And her husband is a dentist, so they're like, oh, maybe he was like exposed to like chemicals like mercury or something. And he's like, come on, a lot of dentists have healthy babies.
I think the reason why they had her have a miscarriage within the movie was that it made it more awkward for the doctor to admit his mistake.
I guess so. Didn't help that much because her performance is really flat. Like, she has a miscarriage. They walk into the room and she's just sitting there like, la-di-da-di-da. Can I get pregnant again? Oh, well.
Well, it's why I didn't know that the kid died, because it was behind a thing. The doctor came out and like looked at them as if he was surprised they were still there and didn't nod or anything. And then he walked into another room, and then she just like turned around and leaned onto the wall as if she like had a minor annoyance in the day.
Yeah.
And then the dad went up and was like, "It's over."
They are very concerned about their child, like when he gets kidnapped and taken away by his creepy fertility doctor uncle and taken to this other weird, creepy anthropologist
who got way too close to him
with a ponytail, which is always a red flag, I would say.
A bad sign. But also, so that doctor, the one with the ponytail, so he had been talking to his, like, they talked at the beginning, and he was trying to, the main doctor was trying to eke out how bad this situation was. And he was like, hypothetically, if we were to accidentally impregnate a woman with the sperm, what do you think the baby would like? Do you think it'd be a normal baby and everything? And then he said, yes, I think it would be just a completely, like, it's modern human sperm, modern human, like, it'd just be a modern human baby, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, why? What did you do? And then he like figured it out. And that's so crazy because, like, I'm pretty sure we've had this conversation at pubs before, right? Like, what would this be like? And could you imagine just bringing this up and then your friend's like, I think Kim might have impregnated somebody with Bronze Age sperm.
Though, I mean,
it's such a wild jump to make.
The dude is a fertility doctor, though.
Yeah, but even like that's still just that's just an interesting conversation thought to have. I don't think you would ever make that leap in your mind that this is obviously what's happened. I mean, it's the same with the media thing when it got out. Everybody just accepted it. Didn't seem to be any pushback, right? So the only evidence was notes in this guy's computer.
Yeah.
Right? He could have just been like, yeah, I'm working on a novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Working
like, that's not good enough. That's not good enough evidence to then, It's not enough evidence to make people believe that it has happened, right?
I love to pause the movies when there's something written on the screen. So the actual file that he's written says, what I experienced yesterday with Adam is beyond explanation. His connection to the cat was interesting, but what he did with the fish was downright scary. Is it a genetic trait? Is it a freak of nature? That's the entire document. And it's saved as adam.doc. So the idea that this guy stole a computer from a doctor and has searched through all of the files and found one called adam.doc that doesn't even, I mean, I guess there were more files over time, but it doesn't even say anything specific, right?
Well, you'd start reading, you'd be like, oh, so he's writing a bad screenplay. Close it and keep looking for what you're looking for.
No wonder he could only kind of sell it to the National Enquirer. I mean, yeah. Right between Bat Boy and Elvis Speaks from Beyond the Grave kind of stories.
I know, if you're going to have something like that, you want the Inquirer to be the one to break the news, because then it loses all credibility.
And how many films have we watched now where one of the lead characters is called Adam? This week's, last week's.
Caveman movie bingo, the character's named Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about genetic memory a little bit. Is there any truth to genetic memory?
There is epigenetics, but it's not genetic memory, right? Or else where you have like I'll have a dream and see my grand's third birthday through her eyes, right? Like that's not how it works. But epigenetics is you explain. I'm not going to try and explain epigenetics. you do it, Russ.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't really know an awful lot about epigenetics. This is me kind of reaching back a long time to kind of undergraduate days. But certainly there it didn't used to be thought that there was any way of passing on things that
acquired characteristics.
Yeah, exactly, acquired characteristics, and that by and large is exactly the case. Like even back in the early days, where they would do kind of really horrific experiments where they would chop the tails off mice and then breed them together for like multiple generations. The mice still always had tails. That's how it went. But more recently, they have looked into epigenetics, which is like a level on top of the DNA code. So my understanding is that there are some things where there's an extra kind of control level, which is regulated by not the DNA code itself, but additional modifications. So things like adding methyl groups onto particular parts of the DNA molecule, altering the histones, which are the proteins that DNA wraps around in the cell, to make them more or less readable by the machinery of the cell. So I'm desperately trying to rack my brains for some examples. I think there's ones that are involved with, there are some particular genes
I have examples
I can't
if you
remember.
want.
Yeah, but what it is that there are some genes where you have to get a particular copy from your father and a particular copy from your mother. If you, for instance, had 2 copies of the father's gene or 2 copies of the mother's gene, they wouldn't work because they're passing on a bit of extra information about who they passed through. And yeah, I really don't understand. I'm basically waffling. But Kim, if you want to jump in with some examples.
So what I teach when I teach my bioenth classes and evolutionary medicine, so this is not to geneticists, right? So I keep it simple. Plus, I don't understand all the details of it. But it's like, it doesn't actually change your DNA, right?
Yeah.
So it's not evolution in that it's changing your DNA. But what it is almost like Lego pieces that go and attach onto the outside of your DNA and changes how it's read and how it's performed, certain parts of the DNA. And then there's things that they found. So they've actually found that inherited trauma is a thing. So it's not inherited memories. The people don't think I'm traumatized. But what it is that there's people who have trauma in their generational ancestry, such as people who are the descendants of Holocaust survivors, that they have higher reaction, PTSD reactions, even if they themselves have not had a trauma that would develop PTSD and anxiety, but they have a quicker reaction to it, and they have symptoms of PTSD, and it seems to be something that's acquired from the ancestral trauma that's been, because it was such horrific experience that it actually made epigenetic changes onto their DNA that then they passed down. And they found this in mice as well, where after if they shock a mouse when it smells cherry blossoms and you do it enough times, eventually their offspring will be scared of the smell of cherry blossoms, right? So you could also explain some instincts that animals have, or what instincts might also be, is this inherited learning. So it's like the experience in the parents are so traumatic that it's put this marker on their DNA, and then they pass it on so that the offspring then, when it smells cherry blossoms, it now has this Lego piece on its DNA that says, when you smell this is it gives you this biochemical reaction.
Yeah. So I mean,
does that sound right?
That sounds spot on. And tying into what you're saying, just remembering that one of the sort of classic studies they did on this is they looked at descendants of people who'd been through famines, like severe famines with high mortality, and they noticed that in their subsequent descendants, even though the famine was over and they had access to a kind of balanced, healthy diet, there was increased issues in their descendants. And so this action of starvation in the, I think, parents and grandparents' generation had activated these epigenetic factors which had modified the DNA, not the sequence itself, but the methylation of the DNA, which has epigenetic effects. And so that could still be found after multiple generations.
Yeah, and that even affects the descendants' metabolism, because what that trauma, like I guess you could say trauma again, what that experience taught their biology is that you don't know when food is going to come. So they actually end up being more obese than others, you'd think that they would be thin because it's like a famine code, but what's actually more obese because their genetics have been telling them that when you have resources, you need to hoard it because what I've learned since my past is that the environment is unstable and you don't know when you're going to get food again.
Totally.
And so, so that's what so malnourished mothers, if it's extremely malnourished and especially when they're pregnant, when they're malnourished, that infant has actually a higher rate of being obese because even when they're developing in the wound, this isn't even necessarily epigenetics, but just the biology of when they're developing in the wound and the mom is malnourished, the biology of the baby learns that when it's born, it's going to be born into a low resource environment, right? So it has to hold on to everything.
I mean, it's really fascinating stuff that I don't really understand all that much about, but it is one of those things that tends to get misused by conspiracists and people that aren't interested in understanding it properly. Epigenetics it's one of those things that sometimes comes up as a red flag when you're reading online discussions when it's thrown out there, like waves and crystals and those kind of things. If you see that someone getting really focused on epigenetics, then you've got to worry that they maybe don't know what they're talking about. Not like us.
Okay, I haven't seen that, but I might have warn my students of that then. Yeah, because it's an important concept and mechanism for evolutionary medicine.
Mm.
So going back to the term genetic memory, that's not correct because it's not genetic, it's epigenetic. Mm-hmm. And memory also isn't really correct because memory kind of gives the impression that it is something conscious in your mind, sort of like a conscious awareness of something that happened in the past, but there is no conscious awareness of something that happened in the past. It's just you have a feeling generally, right? Something happens and you have sort of a programmed trauma response, but you're not consciously aware of why you would be having that response.
It's that your whatever neurons stimulate a biochemical response to environmental stimuli, right? It has nothing. There's no conscious absorbing of it.
Stimulus response. In the same way that people that even haven't got any epigenetic traits and are exposed to a stressful situation will still sometimes develop PTSD, but it's not a conscious thing.
No, exactly.
Well, do we have anything else to say about Evolution's Child?
It's a pretty crappy title as well. I don't know what they were going for with the title.
Yeah, it's a terrible, and it has nothing to do with evolution.
No.
It's just a mad scientist. Well, it's just a fuck up, I guess. And then it's one of those movies that I'll forget that we've ever watched, and when you guys bring it up to me, I won't remember what it's about.
And it is, it's the same as many of the other films, like William, like all these other films where they kind of bring back a half Neanderthal, and they're totally different and magical, and we can learn so much from them.
I know, but this wasn't even a different species. So at least with the half Neanderthal, so you're like, okay, well, there's, different brain anatomy and things, like there is a difference, but with it's just a human.
Yeah.
And in this one, the idea was that once everybody found out he was half a Bronze Age man, they would want to do, scientific testing on him. And like the anthropologist, I guess, who actually was studying him in the first place, was talking about studying the original guy to cure diseases. And like, what diseases are we going to cure by studying a 3,000-year-old mummy, right?
Well, he has all the antibodies to all the things that we already have vaccines for. So
we can cure rabies because apparently he survived that somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unless that was him knowing he was going to die from rabies, going up the mountain to just float away.
He had plague and anthrax and smallpox and rabies all at the same time. And he was like, fuck, I'm done. I might as well go up to the mountain and die. Quarantine myself. Okay, one last thing I wanted to throw in here. The actor who plays the paleoanthropologist, she had recurring role in Star Trek The Next Generation, which, Kim, you said you didn't really watch. And Ross, do you remember the episodes that she was in?
No.
I have to mention this because it's my least favorite episode of Star Trek and the one that I think has aged the worst. So she's in 2 episodes, and the first one, Geordi is the engineer on the ship. He's trying to solve some problems. So what he does is he scours the internet equivalent of the Star Trek universe for everything that this scientist who invented the part that he's trying to fix. He scours the internet for everything she's ever published about it, and also all the details of her personal life. And then he has the holodeck basically like AI deepfake her. And he creates a program where he recreated the part of the ship inside the holodeck with a recreation of this scientist who he's never met, and he talks to her, and together they fix the problem, which is fine. It's weird, but whatever. Kind of creepy. But there's a later episode where that actual doctor is coming to the ship, and he's so excited because he kind of fell for his AI deepfake of her in the previous episode. And then when she gets there, it turns out she's not really much like the personality that the AI created of her, and also she's married. And so Geordi is all like incel about it.
Is this Tinder catfishing before there was Tinder catfishing?
So basically, Geordi made himself a waifu and then got upset that the real person wasn't the same as his clone. This is an episode of Black Mirror,
yes.
Totally.
Yeah, but you know what? It gets worse because the doctor finds his program in the holodeck, and she comes face to face with herself on the holodeck. And then Geordi walks in and she's like, Geordi, what the fuck is this? And Geordi is like, you know what? You should be honored that I recreated you and fell in love with you. And then at the end, she's like, you know what? I'm sorry. I was wrong. You're right. And it has aged so poorly. Geordi is such a fucking creep on that show. He is such an
that's
incel.
That's terrifying. I don't even know how I would, if you went in and there's like an AI of you on the guy's, like, or a sex doll or something that looked like you. Like, it would just be, I can't even imagine. You would just phone the police. You'd phone the police immediately.
Like, you walk in, somebody's got a blow-up doll with your photo picture taped to the head. That is super not cool.
It's not what it looks like. We were just fixing the ship.
Jeez. So I missed the first part of him making it. So he catfished himself, essentially.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's basically like he was photoshopping pictures of a celebrity into like bikinis and stuff like that, right?
God. That's like the Futurama episode with the Lucy Liu bot.
Yes.
It's
like that.
One? Yeah. Jeez.
There's a podcast made by former members of Cracked's YouTube channel called Star Trek. No, it's called Futurama. No, Futurama: The Next Generation. What is it called? Something like that. Basically, they pair up an episode of Star Trek and an episode of Futurama, and they look at the parallels between them. It's really interesting. They probably could have paired up these 2 episodes for that.
Yeah.
I find it with most shows, there's always episodes that every show has, like episode of the family going camping and no one's packed food, and like trying to get to the airport but the car doesn't work, or like there's always, every sitcom has
tropes.
The same episodes.
Yeah.
Star Trek: The Next Futurama. That's what the podcast is called.
Okay.
I think.
When is our 3-year anniversary?
June-ish.
Okay.
Not long.
We don't have a specific anniversary date because we're bi-weekly episodes, so our episodes are never going to align on the exact date. But if we do 26 episodes a year times 3 would be 78 would be our... Yeah. And we are on 76 right now.
Ooh.
Holy cow. Oh my God, we've watched 76 movies.
I can't believe we've done this many. I thought we might do 10 or 20 episodes and then run out of interesting stuff.
7 of them have been good, maybe?
If it's even that high, I'd be surprised.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.